we all use it, right? Our phones, always talking to those towers, all that data flying around. It's like this invisible web connecting us all.
Yeah, it really is.
But have you ever thought about who might be listening in on all that chatter?
Yeah, not something most people think about every day.
Well, today we are diving deep into a global market that thrives on that very idea, the world of cellular interception.
Sounds a bit like a spy movie, doesn't it?
Maybe a little bit. Basically, we're talking about the technology and the business of monitoring and analyzing mobile communications on a, well, global scale.
You got it. We're going to take a look at the whole ecosystem, the players, the trends, the drivers, the whole 9 yards.
And we're doing it all based on a fascinating report, the 2025 Global Cellular Interception Market Report, put together by Cognitive Market Research.
This report really gives us a comprehensive view.
Absolutely. So let's get right to it. What exactly is the size of this market?
Well, get this. The report estimates the global market value at 728.34 million US dollars in 2025.
Wow, that's a pretty big market.
And it's projected to grow even bigger. By 2033, they're estimating it to reach 1,143.45 million US dollars.
Okay, so we're talking serious growth here. What exactly is driving this market?
Well, one of the key factors the report highlights is the increasing adoption of what they call tactical interception systems.
Tactical interception systems. Okay.
Yeah, so think of these as tools designed for more targeted and real-time monitoring in very specific situations.
So more like something you'd use for a short period in a specific area when there's an immediate need.
Exactly. It could be anything from a security operation to disaster response.
That makes sense. Now, geographically speaking, which regions are dominating this market?
Well, no surprises here. North America is currently holding the largest share of the market.
That's interesting. Over 40%, you said.
That's right.
I guess that's not too surprising when you consider their focus on security. But which countries within North America are the main players?
The United States is the clear leader, no question. Their market size in 2025 is estimated at 212.62 million US dollars.
Wow, that's a huge chunk of the market. And their growth rate.
The report projects an annual growth rate of 4.1% for the U.S.
What about our neighbors to the north, Canada?
Canada's market size is estimated at 32.34 million US dollars, with a slightly higher growth rate of 5.1% annually.
And Mexico?
Mexico's market is around 24.52 million, with a growth rate of about 4.8%.
So clearly North America is the big player here. What's driving that dominance in your view?
Well, the report highlights something pretty crucial. The perceived necessity for, sophisticated surveillance capabilities in response to, well, escalating security risks.
You've got to think about things like organized crime, terrorism, and then the whole ever-growing world of cybercrime.
Exactly. Those are major concerns for any government.
And how do advancements in technology play into all of this?
Technology is a huge factor. The rollout of 5G, for instance, well, it allows for so much more data to be collected and analyzed.
Right, because of the higher bandwidth.
And then you've got artificial intelligence, or AI, coming into the picture.
AI can sift through all that data at incredible speeds.
Exactly. It can help identify patterns and threats much more effectively.
I see. So North America is clearly in the lead, but what's the picture like in Europe?
Europe holds a significant share of the market, too, accounting for over 30% of global revenue.
That's a sizable portion.
Their market size in 2025 is estimated at 211.22 million US dollars.
Okay, and their projected growth?
It's expected to grow at a rate of 4.9% per year until 2033.
That's pretty healthy growth. What about the specific countries driving this growth in Europe?
Well, the UK is a major market, of course. It's estimated at 35.48 million US dollars, with a growth rate of 5.7% annually. Then you've got Germany at 41.82 million with 5.1% growth. And you can't forget Russia coming in at 32.7 million and a growth rate of 3.9%.
Interesting. Okay. And what about the rest of Europe?
Oh, there's several other important markets. France is estimated at 19.43 million, growing at 4.1% annually. Italy, 18.16 million with 4.3% growth. And Spain, 17.32 million at a rate of 4%. You've also got smaller but still significant markets like Sweden, Denmark, Switzerland, and even Luxembourg.
So Europe is definitely a major player in this space. What are the primary factors driving demand there?
Well, a lot of it comes down to the increasing need for robust network security and effective fraud prevention. And then, of course, the importance of adhering to regulatory compliance for all those telecom operators.
Right, so they need these tools to combat cyber attacks, to prevent fraud, and to make sure they're operating within the law, and all this as they're adapting to 5G networks.
Exactly.
Got it. Let's switch gears and look at the Asia-Pacific region. The report highlighted it as having the fastest growth. What's happening over there?
Asia Pacific is definitely the region to watch. They currently hold about 23% of the global market revenue.
Okay, that's a decent chunk, but still smaller than North America and Europe.
Right, but the growth rate is where it gets interesting.
How fast are we talking?
They're projected to grow at a rate of 8.5% per year. That's significantly faster than any other region.
Wow, 8.5%. That's pretty impressive. And the key players in that region?
China leads the pack with a market size of 73.42 million US dollars and a growth rate of 8% annually. Japan comes in second at 24.12 million with a 7% growth rate. And South Korea is right behind them at 20.98 million, and that's a 7.6% growth rate.
And India?
India is particularly interesting. They have the highest individual country growth rate at a whopping 10.4%. Their market size in 2025 is estimated at 17.48 million.
Wow, 10.4%. That's amazing. So what's fueling that rapid growth in Asia Pacific?
It's a complex mix of factors. A lot of it has to do with increasing security challenges.
Yeah.
You've got cyber threats on the rise, concerns about border security, and the ever-present risk of terrorism.
And given the geopolitical dynamics in the region, that's not surprising.
Right. On top of that, there's growing demand from the defense and military sectors. Plus, you've got the rapid adoption of 5G technology, which plays a role in enhancing military communication capabilities.
It seems like, well, security is obviously a global concern, but the specific drivers for this market can vary greatly from region to region.
Definitely.
Speaking of regional variations, what's the situation like in South America?
South America represents a smaller portion of the market, just over 5%, with an estimated market size of 27.68 million US dollars in 2025.
Okay, so a relatively small market. And their growth rate?
The report predicts an annual growth rate of 6.5%.
Solid growth. And which countries are driving that growth?
Brazil is leading the way with a market size of $11.85 million and a growth rate of 7.1%.
That's pretty strong growth. Any other notable markets in South America?
Argentina is another significant one with a market size of 4.65 million and a growth rate of 7.4%. And then you've got Colombia at 2.46 million, growing at a rate of 6.3%. Plus, you have some smaller markets like Peru and Chile that are contributing to the overall growth.
So what's driving the demand for cellular interception in South America?
It really comes down to a few key factors. They're seeing a rise in cyber risks and data breaches, and naturally there are growing concerns about privacy.
That's a global trend, it seems.
It is. And as a result, there's an increased demand for robust cybersecurity solutions. They need to protect private data, secure critical infrastructure, and ensure they're complying with data protection laws as 5G networks are rolled out.
All valid concerns. Moving on to the Middle East. What's their position in this market?
The Middle East accounts for about 2% of the global market, with a market size of $29.13 million in 2025.
Okay, another smaller market.
Right. But their projected growth rate is actually pretty healthy at 7.1%.
Interesting. Which countries stand out in that region?
Saudi Arabia has the largest market, coming in at 10.26 million US dollars with an annual growth rate of 7.4%.
Okay.
The UAE is the next biggest player at 6 million, growing at 7.6%.
And the rest of the region?
You also have some smaller but significant markets like Qatar, Turkey, and Egypt contributing to the regional total.
So what are the main drivers for growth in the Middle East?
A lot of it comes down to the need for enhanced public safety and stronger national security measures.
With all the geopolitical instability in that region, I'm not surprised.
Right. Governments there are investing heavily in intelligence and security capabilities to combat a wide range of threats, including terrorism, cyber attacks, and, well, managing disaster response. Plus, like we've seen in other regions, the adoption of 5G is also a contributing factor.
Makes sense. Finally, let's look at Africa. What's the picture like there?
Africa currently holds the smallest share of the market, around 1%, with an estimated market size of $16.02 million in 2025.
That's a pretty small slice of the pie. And their growth rate.
It's projected to grow at a rate of 6.1% annually.
Okay, so steady growth, but from a smaller starting point. Which countries are the key players in Africa?
South Africa is the biggest market in the region, at $5.64 million, with a 7% annual growth rate.
And the rest of the continent?
The rest of Africa combined represents a market size of $9.10 million, growing at 5.3%. Nigeria is another one to watch. It's a smaller market at $1.28 million, but they have a growth rate of 6.3%.
Interesting. So what's driving the demand for cellular interception in Africa?
Well, one notable trend is the increasing adoption of this technology in the private sector.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's not just governments anymore?
Exactly. Companies are using it for all sorts of things.
Like what?
To strengthen their data security, protect against corporate espionage and fraud, and of course deal with the ever-present threat of cybercrime.
Which industries are using it the most?
It's especially prevalent in sectors like banking, telecom, and energy.
So high-stakes industries.
Exactly.
What about governments in Africa?
Well, in some regions, they're using it to monitor terrorist communications.
Okay, so security is a big factor there too.
Absolutely. And then you've got other factors at play, like in South Africa, where there's increased government spending on armed forces and law enforcement. Plus, the ongoing drive for risk management and compliance with data protection laws, and of course, the rollout of 5G, are all contributing to the demand.
It's fascinating to see how this market is being shaped by so many different factors all over the world. Now, let's break it down a bit. The report delves into the different components of this market, starting with software.
Right. And the report highlights that software is really set to be the dominant component in this market.
That makes sense.
The reason for that is pretty simple. You need sophisticated software to really make use of all the data that's collected.
So we're not just talking about recording phone calls anymore.
Oh, no, this is way beyond that. You need things like signal processing tools to actually make sense of all that raw data.
Okay, so kind of like translating it into something understandable.
Exactly. And then you've got things like analytics platforms to identify patterns and trends, decryption algorithms to, unlock those encrypted communications, and even AI-powered surveillance software to automate threat detection.
It sounds like a whole digital arsenal. And what about the hardware side of things?
Well, hardware is identified as the fastest growing segment of the market
Okay, why is that?
because there's a constant need for increasingly advanced interception devices. Think of things like, IMS eye catchers, which are essentially fake cell towers designed to collect data from mobile devices.
I've heard of those. They sound kind of scary.
They can be controversial for sure. And then you've got things like signal jammers, monitoring stations, and highly sophisticated signal analyzers.
So basically all the gear you need to actually intercept the data in the first place.
Exactly. And as 5G networks become more widespread and, complex, the demand for even more advanced hardware is just going to keep growing.
It sounds like we're talking about a technological arms race of sorts.
You could say that. Now, besides the components, the report also looks at the different types of interception products that are out there.
Okay, what are we talking about here?
Well, they make a distinction between strategic and tactical interception systems.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Right now, strategic interception systems hold the largest share of the market.
And these are primarily used by?
Mostly by government agencies, intelligence services, and for national security purposes.
Okay, makes sense.
These systems are designed for, long-term real-time monitoring and tracking.
So they're using this to try to get a handle on, criminal networks, terrorist activities, that sort of thing.
Exactly. They need that constant stream of intelligence to try to stay ahead of the game.
Right, so strategic interception systems are for the big picture. What about the other type, the tactical systems?
Well, tactical interception systems are experiencing some pretty rapid growth.
What makes them different?
These are more for immediate use in very specific high-risk situations. Think of things like border patrols, narcotics enforcement operations, or counterterrorism efforts.
So we're talking about more localized, on-the-ground stuff.
Exactly. And they often rely on things like mobile tracking units and those IMS eye catchers we talked about earlier.
So strategic systems for the long game, tactical systems for the here and now.
You got it.
Okay, makes sense. Now, I know the report also breaks things down by technology, specifically the different cellular network technologies involved.
Right. And it's interesting because, well, the 3G, 4G LTE segment still holds the largest share of the market.
Even with 5G becoming more common,
Exactly. And the reason is pretty straightforward.
because most of the world still relies on 3G and 4G.
Exactly. Those networks are still the most widely used globally, so it makes sense that the interception technologies that can monitor them effectively are still, well, they're still in high demand.
Makes sense. Now, you mentioned earlier that CDMA was the fastest growing technology segment.
Right, and this might seem a bit counterintuitive, given that the industry is moving towards newer standards.
Yeah, you'd think CDMA would be on its way out.
You'd think so, but the reality is that CDMA networks are still operating in some parts of the world. So they need ways to intercept communications on those networks, too, for security and intelligence purposes.
Okay, so it's about addressing the existing infrastructure even as newer technologies come online. Makes sense. Now, besides technologies, the report also looks at the different applications for cellular interception, right?
It does.
So who are the main users of these technologies?
Well, the public sector is currently the biggest user.
Meaning?
Government agencies, law enforcement, national security services, all that. They make up the largest share of the market.
Okay, so we're talking about everything from criminal investigations to counterterrorism efforts to border security, all of that.
Absolutely. And within the public sector, you've got agencies at all levels, from local police departments to national intelligence agencies.
A pretty wide range of users. And what about the private sector?
Well, the private sector is the fastest growing segment of the market.
Really? So businesses are increasingly using these technologies.
Exactly. They're using it for things like network monitoring to ensure the security of their own systems.
Makes sense, especially with the rise of cyber attacks.
Right. They're also using it for corporate security to protect sensitive information and trade secrets.
I can see how that would be valuable. Any other uses in the private sector?
Telecom operators are using it for intelligence gathering to make sure their networks are running smoothly and securely. And then you've got security businesses, cybersecurity firms, all kinds of organizations that are incorporating these capabilities into their services.
So while governments are still the biggest users, businesses are definitely catching up.
For sure. They're realizing that these tools can be very valuable for their own security and operations.
Now, I know every market has its own unique dynamics. What are some of the key drivers and restraints for the cellular interception market?
Well, on the driver side, one of the biggest factors is the increasing need for what they call lawful interception.
Meaning?
Essentially, legally authorized access to communications data for very specific purposes.
So there are legal frameworks in place to regulate how these technologies are used.
Absolutely. It's not a free-for-all.
Makes sense. What else is driving this market?
Well, there's the obvious one. Crime. With rising crime rates globally, both traditional and cybercrime, there's a growing demand for tools that can help law enforcement and intelligence agencies do their jobs.
And then, of course, there's the fact that we're living in an increasingly connected world. More people using mobile devices means more data to potentially monitor.
Exactly. It's all connected. Now, on the restraint side, one of the biggest factors is, well, ethics.
Right, these are powerful technologies.
They are. And there are serious ethical considerations, particularly when it comes to privacy.
Absolutely. People have a right to privacy, and these technologies have the potential to be very intrusive.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance. And then, of course, you've got the legal and regulatory landscape, which can vary from country to country.
So there are rules in place to limit who can use these technologies and for what purpose.
Absolutely. And in many countries, the sale and use of these tools are strictly limited to authorized government agencies.
Makes sense. So we've got these competing forces at play, driving and restraining the market. What about the future? What are some of the key trends we should be watching?
Well, one of the big ones is the growing demand for cloud-based interception solutions.
What's driving that trend?
Cloud-based solutions offer a lot of advantages. They're more scalable, flexible, and accessible than traditional on-premise solutions.
Makes sense. What else is on the horizon?
The other big trend, as we've talked about, is 5G. As 5G networks become more widespread and sophisticated, the demand for interception technologies that can effectively operate in that environment is only going to grow.
It seems like 5G is a game changer in so many ways.
It really is. It's changing the landscape for cellular interception, too.
Now, finally, let's talk about the companies operating in this market. Who are the key players?
Well, this is a very specialized and competitive market. And the competition is really focused on a few key areas: advancements in 5G interception capabilities, integrating AI-driven analytics to make sense of all that data, and just overall technological breakthroughs that enhance interception effectiveness.
Right, so it's all about pushing the envelope. Any specific companies you can mention?
The report lists a whole bunch of companies. Some of the names that came up include the spyphone.com, Certine, Noviokia Way, Netline Communications Technologies, HSS Development, Shogi Communications Ltd, PICSX, Endo-Acoustica Europe, SRL, MaxSA Group, Sovereign Systems, Axiom Technologies PVT Ltd, and PERT Telecom Solutions, PVT Ltd.
Wow, that's a lot of companies. It sounds like a pretty diverse landscape.
It is.
The report even highlights a couple of specific examples of recent activity in this market. Can you tell me about those?
Sure. One example is Pertsol's partnership with BSNL in India. They're working on implementing a location-based system that's integrated with legal interception capabilities.
So, combining location data with interception capabilities, that sounds pretty powerful. What's the other example?
The report also mentioned a partnership between Corning and Enersys. They're working to streamline fiber and power delivery for small cell 5G sites.
So, they're not directly involved in interception, but they're building the infrastructure that will support these technologies.
Exactly. It just goes to show how this market is constantly evolving and being influenced by so many different factors.
It's a fascinating look into a very complex world.
Definitely. It's a reminder that there's a lot happening behind the scenes in our digital lives.
So, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about the size and growth of this market, the key players, the technologies, and the trends shaping its future. It's clear that cellular interception is a significant and often unseen aspect of our increasingly connected world. But it also raises some important questions. As we wrap up this deep dive, I'd like you to consider this. In a world where security and privacy are often in tension, how do you see the future balance between these competing demands evolving in the realm of cellular interception? And what are the broader societal implications of this growing market that operates within the very fabric of our digital lives? It's a lot to think about, and it's a conversation that we need to keep having.
Absolutely. It's an issue that deserves careful consideration.
Thanks for joining me today, and thanks to all of you for listening.
It was a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Until next time, stay curious and stay engaged.